A woman hogs her son in 1931, but zooming in on the boy's face, something feels off. Dr. Margaret Chen adjusted her reading glasses as she carefully examined the old photograph that had arrived at the Smithsonian's archives that morning. The black and white image, dated 1931, captured a tender moment. A woman in a simple cotton dress embracing a young boy of perhaps 8 years old. They stood in front of what appeared to be a modest farmhouse somewhere in rural Kansas. Based on the flat horizon and the wooden fence visible in the background, just another Depression family photo, Margaret murmured to herself, noting the woman's worn shoes and the boy's patched clothing, which told the story of those difficult times. The photograph had been donated by the estate of LLN in a Hartwell, along with dozens of other family memorabilia from the early 20th century DRs. Margaret reached for her magnifying glass to examine the photographs. Conditioned for archival purposes, something made her pause. The woman's face showed genuine maternal love, her arms wrapped protectively around the child. Her expression was soft and caring, exactly what one would expect from a mother holding a son. The boy, however, was different. Margaret leaned closer, her breath catching slightly, while the woman gazed down at the child with unmistakable affection. The boy's eyes seemed to stare straight ahead with an intensity that felt unsettling for someone so young. His small hands, which should have been relaxed in his mother's embrace, appeared rigid at his sides. "That's odd," she whispered, adjusting the desk lamp for a better lighting. The more she studied the boy's face, the more uncomfortable she became. There was something in his expression, not the innocent wonder of childhood, but something else entirely, something far too mature, too calculated for an age-old child. Margaret made a note in her research log, unusual family photograph. Recommend further investigation into the Hartwell family history. She had no way of knowing that this single photograph would unravel a mystery hidden for more than 90 years, changing everything she thought she knew about the power of a mother's love and the secrets families keep buried in plain sight. 3 days later, Margaret found herself driving through the winding roads of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, toward the sprawling Victorian house that had belonged to Ellen in a Hartwell. The elderly woman had passed away at 97, leaving behind a meticulously organized estate and a reputation in the small town of Millfield as someone who had lived quietly but purposefully. Elenina's great-niece, Sarah Morrison, met Margaret at the front door. Sarah was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying brown hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. She worked as a librarian in Philadelphia, but had taken time off to manage her great-aunt's affairs. "I'm so glad someone from the Smithsonian is interested in Antolino's collection," Sarah said as she led Margaret through rooms filled with carefully preserved furniture and photographs. She was passionate about family history, though she was always quite private about certain aspects of our family's past. The house felt like stepping back in time. Hardwood floors creaked beneath their feet as they passed walls lined with family portraits spanning several generations. Margaret noticed that many of the photographs were professionally mounted and labeled with Elenina in his neat handwriting. She never married or had children of her own, Sarah explained, but she devoted her life to preserving our family's story. She used to say that photographs were windows into souls, that they revealed truths people might prefer to keep hidden. They reached Elenina in a study, a cozy room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large oak desk covered with magnifying glasses. Photo albums, research notes. Sarah picked up a leather-bound journal from the desk. "This might interest you," she said, handing it to Margaret. "And Lenena's research notes about the 1931 photograph you mentioned on the phone. She spent years trying to understand that particular image." Margaret opened the journal carefully. Ellen's handwriting filled the pages with dates, observations, and questions. One entry immediately caught her attention. "The boy in mother's arms. Why do his eyes hold such darkness? What did he know that we never understood? The truth about Thomas must be somewhere in the photographs." "Thomas?" Margaret looked up at Sarah. "Who was Thomas?" Sarah's expression grew troubled. "That's just it. We are not entirely sure." Later, Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee from an old percolator in Elena's kitchen, while Margaret spread several photographs across the wooden table. The afternoon sun streamed from lace curtains, casting intricate shadows across the images. "What I'm about to tell you might sound strange." Sarah began settling into her chair. "Growing up, I heard whispered conversations among the older family members about a boy named Thomas, who lived with my great-grandmother, Ruth Hartwell, in the early 1930s, but the stories never quite matched up." She pointed to the 1931 photograph that had started Margaret's investigation. Some relatives insisted this was Ruth's son Thomas, who died young of influenza. Others claimed he wasn't her biological son at all, but a child she was caring for temporarily. A few family members even suggested that Thomas never existed, that the photograph showed a different child entirely. Margaret studied the image again, noting the boy's peculiar expression. What did Elalan believe? That's what makes this so intriguing, S replied, pulling another photograph from a manila envelope. Angela Nenna found this last year while going through some papers in the attic. The second photograph, also from 1931, but taken several months later based on the seasonal clothing, showed the same woman, Ruth Hartwell, standing alone in front of the farmhouse. She appeared tired, almost haunted, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Most notably, there was no sign of the boy. Look at the back, Sarah urged. Margaret carefully turned the photograph over in faded ink. Someone had written, "After Thomas left us, may God forgive what we allowed to happen." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Left, but your family members said he died of influenza. Exactly, S said grimly. That's when Aunt Eleanor realized her family had been keeping secrets for nearly a century. She became obsessed with finding out the truth about Thomas, who he really was, where he came from, and most importantly, what happened to him. Margaret pulled out her notebook. Did Layla discover anything else? Sarah hesitated before reaching for a third photograph. She found this hidden behind the frame of an old mirror in the attic. It's dated 2 weeks before the first photograph was taken. This image showed Ruth Hartwell with a completely different boy, one with lighter hair and a genuine smile. The resemblance between Ruth and this second child was unmistakable. This, Sarah said quietly, was Ruth's actual son, James. He died of pneumonia in early 1931, just days after this photograph was taken. Margaret returned to Washington, D.C., with copies of all 3 photographs and Ella Nenna's research notes, her mind racing with questions. The next morning, she reached out to Dr. James Patterson, a colleague who specialized in photographic authentication and historical document analysis. "I need you to examine these images very carefully," she told James as they met in his laboratory at Georgetown University. "I want to know everything: the paper, the chemicals used in developing them, any signs of tampering or manipulation." James was a meticulous researcher in his mid-50s who had helped solve several historical mysteries through his detailed analysis of photographs and documents. He placed the first photograph under a high-powered digital microscope connected to a computer monitor. "Interesting," he murmured after 7 minutes. "The photograph is definitely authentic. The paper and chemical composition are consistent with 1931 photography techniques. But there's something unusual about the image quality." Margaret leaned closer. "What do you mean?" "See this area around the boy's face?" James pointed to the magnified image on the screen. "The grain structure is slightly different. It's subtle, but it suggests this portion of the photograph may have been subject to some kind of additional processing or exposure." He switched to the second photograph of Ruth standing alone. "This image shows no such irregularities. It's a straightforward photograph taken with standard equipment to the era." But when James examined the third photograph, Ruth with her biological son, James, he made a discovery that changed everything. "Margaret, you need to see this," he said, his voice filled with excitement. He overlaid the 2 images on his computer screen, adjusting for slight differences in positioning and lighting. "Look at the background elements, the fence posts, the shadows, the positioning of the farmhouse." Margaret stared at the screen. The backgrounds were nearly identical, suggesting the photographs had been taken from almost exactly the same spot. But more importantly, James continued, "Look at this." He zoomed in on Ruth's dress in both photographs. "See this small tear in the fabric near her left shoulder? It's visible in both images. And here, this scuff mark on her shoe." These photographs were taken much closer together in time than the dates suggest. Margaret felt her heart race. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that based on the physical evidence, Ruth's clothing, the lighting conditions, even the way her hair is arranged, these photographs were likely taken on the same day, possibly within hours of each other." And with this new information, Margaret decided to travel to Millfield, Kansas, where the Hardwell family had lived in 1931.